She grew up without knowing the truth, raised under protection and lies, yet far too rebellious to accept the fate her father tried to impose on her. Meanwhile, he grew up among ruins and blood, forever marked by the night he watched his mother be murdered by the enemy kingdom. Pain became a vow, hatred, his training. He was shaped to destroy everything that carried that blood. She chose to run, not out of cowardice, but to seek the truth in the only place where it could never be hidden: war. He entered the battlefield determined to kill the warrior of the enemy kingdom, leaving no room for mercy or doubt. But fate is cruel to those who swear in certainties. When the Alpha finally wounded the enemy and lifted the helmet, the world stood still. It was not him, it was her, and she was his mate. The metal was heavier than Elysia had expected. She adjusted the chainmail on her left shoulder for the third time, feeling the unfamiliar weight pressing against her collarbone. The stolen armor had not been made for her. It had been forged for a soldier who was probably dead by now, forgotten in the storage room for damaged equipment where no one looked anymore. The steel plates creaked softly with every movement, a sound that made her freeze and wait, heart pounding, certain someone would hear. No one did. The chaos of military mobilization was the perfect cover. Soldiers ran back and forth across the courtyard, shouting orders, preparing horses, tightening armor. News had arrived at dawn. A border town was under threat of attack. Fenrath's troops were approaching. King Ariston had summoned every available guard to march immediately. And Elysia, locked in her chambers since she had tried to escape 3 days earlier, had seen the opportunity open like a door lit in the darkness. Now or never. She finished tying the leather straps that held the pieces in place, fingers trembling, but resolute. 19 years living within those suffocating walls, being shaped, controlled, silenced, pretending to be docile while the wolf inside her snarled to be set free. Because that was what she was, what everyone there was. Werewolves. The kingdom of Ariston, like Fenrath, was inhabited exclusively by their kind. Creatures trapped between two worlds. Full transformation only happened after 18 years of age, when the inner wolf finally matured and fused completely with the human. Elysia had gone through it less than a year ago, feeling her bones break and reform for the first time, feeling the wolf truly awaken, wild, strong, free, everything she could never be in human form. But even after the transformation, even with the wolf now permanently awake inside her, whispering instincts and power into her mind, she was still trapped, not for much longer. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, cold and final. Lord Kael has agreed to the marriage. You will leave in 5 days. You will finally be useful for something. 5 days. The wolf growled, scraping against her ribs, demanding a freedom the human body could not give, while she remained in that gilded cage. Elysia looked at her reflection in a polished metal shield hanging on the storage room wall. A metallic shadow where once there had been a princess adorned in silks and jewels. Blonde hair, usually loose in waves her father demanded because it made her look more docile, was now pulled tight at the nape of her neck, ready to disappear beneath a helmet. She picked up the stolen sword, feeling the familiar weight in her hand. This one she knew. She had convinced young guards to teach her in secret, in forgotten corners of the training yard, in abandoned warehouses, anywhere she could practice without being seen. Because women, especially princesses, did not fight. But Elysia was not like the others. She never had been. Where other noble girls learned embroidery, she memorized sword movements. Where they practiced etiquette, she strengthened muscles. She was good. Better than the guards expected. Better than she herself had imagined. Fast, precise, lethal when necessary. But werewolves fight with claws and fangs, someone might ask. Why swords? The answer was simple. Control. Transforming into a wolf consumed brutal amounts of energy. The transformation was reserved for critical moments, finishing blows, when the advantage of the wolf form outweighed the cost. It was strategy, survival, the difference between victory and massacre, and you will need every advantage you can get. The thought came with the wolf's voice, rough and feral, because they will show no mercy if they discover who you are. Elysia fastened the scabbard to her belt, with hands that no longer trembled. Fear had burned away, consumed by determination growing like fire in her bones. Outside, a commander's voice barked orders. "All mounted in 10 minutes. We march to the border." She took a deep breath one last time, placed the helmet that turned her face into anonymous metal, and left the storage room straight into the chaos of the courtyard. No one looked twice at one more soldier joining the ranks. The march lasted 2 days. Elysia rode in the middle of the formation, keeping her head down, helmet always in place. The other soldiers talked around her. Stories of past battles, complaints about the cold, speculation about the confrontation ahead. She pretended to sleep when they stopped to rest, pretended to check equipment when someone got too close. The beast remained alert, ears attuned to any threat, muscles ready to flee if she were discovered. But no one suspected. Why would they? Who would imagine that the daughter of King Ariston was hidden among common soldiers, marching toward a battle that could kill her? Better to die fighting than to live as property. The thought was simple. True. When they reached the border town, the sun was low on the horizon, painting everything blood red. Parts of the city were burning. Recent attacks had left scars. And beyond the damaged walls, through smoke rising in twisted columns, Elysia could see camps. Fenrath's troops. Her heart raced. The wolf stirred low, sensing danger and something else. Something she could not name. "Defensive formation," the commander shouted. "Archers on the towers, infantry with me." Elysia followed, sword drawn, trying to control the breath speeding up inside the stifling helmet. This was real. This was... The first attack came like thunder. Fenrath warriors emerged from the smoke, most in human form wearing black armor. A few already transformed into massive wolves who used the advantage of speed before returning to human form to conserve energy. The clash was brutal. Metal against metal, snarls against screams, blood beginning to stain the ground. Elysia fought because there was no choice, and she fought better than she had ever been allowed to be. She blocked a blow that would have decapitated the soldier beside her, countering with a precise cut that found her opponent's throat. She dodged claws that tore through the air where her face had been seconds earlier, spinning to drive her sword between another attacker's ribs. She was not the best on the field, but she was good enough to survive. The beast sang with every strike, every victory, finally free to do what it had been born to do. This is living. But even the best make mistakes. Elysia was too focused on the opponent in front of her, and did not see the warrior approaching from the side. He was large, experienced, and when she finally noticed, it was already too late. She turned to block, but he was already inside her guard, his blade coming in a diagonal arc she tried to deflect. The sword slipped between the poorly fitted plates of her armor, cutting deep into her shoulder. Pain exploded, white and blinding. Elysia felt her legs give way, felt the world spin. She fell onto the mud slick with blood, hers and others, the impact driving the air from her lungs. The warrior who struck her had already turned to the next opponent, leaving her where she lay. Elysia clenched her teeth against the pain tearing through her shoulder. The wound was deep. She could feel hot blood soaking the armor. But werewolves healed quickly, not instantly. If she could get out of the battle, if she could get time, her body would close the cut, rebuild the damaged tissue. But I need to get out of here first. She tried to rise, but dizziness hit like a wave. Too much blood loss. Too fast. Get up. Get up. but her vision was darkening. Her body no longer obeyed. The battle raged around her, but the sounds were starting to fade. Boots stomped near her head. Blood splattered against her helmet. Consciousness began to slip. When the battle finally ended, when the last scream died and the heavy silence of death settled in, Raiden walked the field checking for survivors. It was always the part he hated most. Seeing the faces of the dead. Too young, too old. All the same once the blood stopped flowing. He was about to turn to the next section when something made the wolf inside him growl. Not in threat. In recognition? Raiden stopped, frowning. He turned his head, searching for the source of the strange sensation creeping up his spine. And then he saw it. A body fallen a few meters ahead. Armor marked with Ariston's crest. Too small for most soldiers. Motionless. Something inside him pulled. What? Raiden walked toward the fallen body, each step making the strange sensation grow. It was not danger. It was something deeper, more primal. Something that put the alpha inside him on alert in a completely different way. He knelt beside the fallen soldier. He saw dark blood staining the armor at the shoulder. He saw the chest rise and fall weakly, alive, but barely. And then he touched her, just checking the pulse at the neck, where skin was exposed between helmet and armor. The world exploded. Heat. Impossible fire racing through every vein, every nerve, every cell. A brutal connection tearing through all barriers, burning so fiercely that Raiden gasped, his hand freezing in place. His wolf roared, not in anger or pain, but in absolute recognition. Mate. The word echoed through every bone, every muscle, every fragment of his soul. No, no, no. Of all possibilities, not a soldier. But the bond did not care about denial. It was already there, sealed, irrevocable. The sacred chain linking two souls, impossible to break. With hands that trembled, not with fear, but with something far worse, Raiden tore off the helmet. Blonde hair spilled free. Golden waves plastered to her forehead with sweat and blood, spreading in the muddy ground like tarnished gold. Long lashes rested against pale cheeks, lips parted, struggling to breathe. Beautiful. The thought came before he could stop it, brutal and unwanted. Her eyes opened, green, like forest after rain, wide with pain and confusion, slowly focusing on him. And Elysia felt it, even through the haze of pain, even as consciousness slipped. She felt it. The connection striking like lightning, burning through every barrier she had built. Her wolf, always controlled, always restrained, fully awakened with a silent howl that echoed through her entire soul. Mate, mate, mate. It was not a thought. It was absolute knowing. And it was him. Elysia looked into the golden eyes of the man kneeling over her, a warrior of the enemy, far too powerful to be ordinary, and understood, with devastating clarity, that her fate had been sealed in the cruelest possible way. No. The thought came weak and desperate. It cannot be him. Anyone but him. But she saw in his eyes that he felt the same. She saw shock. She saw horror. She saw denial warring with recognition. And she saw the exact moment his gaze dropped to the partially visible crest on the damaged armor. Ariston. Reality hit Raiden like a physical blow. Damn it. He looked at her again. Really looked. At the blonde hair spread in the bloody mud like gold fallen from the sky. At the green eyes beginning to close in pain, but still watching him with devastating confusion. At the parted mouth struggling to breathe, lips stained with blood. Damn it. Damn it. Damn it. She had to be from the other kingdom, Raiden muttered to himself, his voice hoarse with desperation that edged on hysteria. A humorless laugh threatened to escape. She had to be beautiful. Of course she did. He glanced up at the sky for a second, as if he could find the ancients there and demand explanations. The ancients have a cruel sense of humor, he said to no one, to the universe, to the fate that had just destroyed his life. Extremely cruel. Because of the millions of werewolves alive in the kingdoms, of the countless females he could have been destined to meet, the ancient forces that wove destinies and bound souls had chosen this. An Ariston, too beautiful to be real, and his, irrevocably his. Why not just kill me in battle? The thought came bitterly. It would have been more merciful. The wolf inside him did not care about logic or history or ancient hatred. It knew only one thing: mate, wounded, protect, now. No. The word came from her weakly, almost inaudible. It was unclear whether it was meant for him, the bond, or the situation as a whole. But Raiden had no time for existentialism. She was losing blood. He lifted her into his arms with a care that clashed violently with the devastation on his face. She was light, too light, even with the armor. Enemy, his mind screamed, cursed. Mate, the wolf roared back. Ours, protect, save. Alicia tried to speak, but only a moan escaped. The pain in her shoulder was spreading, and even with werewolf healing beginning to work along the edges of the wound, it was too deep. Easy. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He began to walk, carrying her across the battlefield as it slowly dispersed. His men stared, surprised, confused to see the prince carrying an enemy soldier with such care. But none dared question him when they saw the expression on his face. Something between fury and despair, so intense it made seasoned warriors step back. Alicia fought to keep her eyes open, fought against the darkness pulling her under. But she was losing. The last thing she registered before consciousness slipped was his warmth around her, the rapid beat of his heart against her body, and the devastating sensation of the bond singing even as everything else faded. Mate, and then nothing. Throughout the entire journey back to Fenrath's castle, while she remained unconscious in his arms, Raiden waged a silent war. The thought hammered in his mind. Enemy. Cursed blood. But the bond did not care. It burned wherever she touched his armor, demanded that he keep her close, safe, alive. She is my mate. And that truth was stronger than any oath of vengeance, deeper than any ancient hatred. He looked down at her face, pale and still against his chest. Werewolf healing was working. He could see the blood slowing, could feel her body beginning to repair the damage. But it would still take hours, perhaps an entire day before she was fully healed. Enough time for him to decide what the hell to do. What were you doing there? The question echoed unanswered. Why was a princess of Ariston fighting on a battlefield? It made no sense. None of this made sense. When the castle appeared on the horizon, Raiden made a decision. He would not kill her. He could not. The bond would literally not allow it. Trying would be like tearing out his own heart. But he could not free her either. He could not let her return to Ariston, not when every cell in his body screamed to keep her close. The dungeons. It was not ideal. The wolf inside him snarled in protest, putting his mate in a cold cell, injured, alone. But it was the only solution he could see. At least for now, until he figured out what to do with this curse. When they reached the castle, ignoring the confused voices of guards and counselors demanding to know who the prisoner was, Raiden descended into the dungeons. He laid her on the cot with a care that contradicted the situation, stepped back, locked the iron bars between them, and stood there, staring at her through the metal, fighting the worst battle of his life. The wolf whimpered, wounded, needs care. Ours. Enemy, the mind insisted. Danger. Ariston. Elysia remained unconscious, but the healing was progressing. color slowly returning to her cheeks, her breathing deepening. Raiden closed his eyes, resting his forehead against the cold bars. This is going to destroy me. Because there was no happy ending here. There was no way to reconcile what the bond demanded with who she was, with the oaths he had sworn, with the blood staining both sides of this cursed war. But there was also no way to walk away. Alicia woke to the weight of a gaze. Not the cold stone against her back, not the throbbing ache in her healed shoulder, but the presence, heavy, intense, impossible to ignore, of someone watching every breath she took. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dimness of the cell, lit only by distant torches. And then she saw him. He was there, on the other side of the bars, motionless as a statue, golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. There was no way to tell how long he had been there. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. Alicia forced herself to sit up, ignoring the way her body protested the movement. The silence between them was thick, loaded with unspoken things that seemed to fill every inch of air in the dungeon. How long have you been standing there? Her voice came out rough, broken from disuse. Long enough. His answer was deep, controlled. Long enough to question every decision that brought me to this point. Alicia rose fully, her legs still shaky but steady enough, and walked to the bars. She kept her distance. Not too close, but close enough to see the details the battle had hidden. The thin scar above his brow, the tension in his jaw, the way he breathed, like he was fighting a war inside himself. "Do you know my name?" she asked. Alicia Ariston. He said her surname like ash on his tongue. Only daughter of King Ariston. Her stomach dropped. He knew exactly who she was. "And yours?" Alicia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Raiden." He stepped closer to the bars. "Crown Prince of Fenrath, Alpha of the Royal Pack, son of the king your father tried to assassinate." Tried. The word landed with weight. The bond. Alicia forced the words past her tight throat. "You felt it." It wasn't a question. "Yes." The confirmation came tight. "Mate." The word fell between them like a stone dropped into still water. Alicia closed her eyes, trying to steady the breath that was speeding up dangerously. "So you know I can't—" "Neither can I." The interruption was sharp. She opened her eyes, meeting his through the iron. There was something devastating there. Something that felt like desperation mixed with rage, mixed with need. The wolf inside her growled low, recognizing his, calling, demanding she step closer, touch him, claim what was hers. Alicia took one step, then another, until she was inches from the bars, close enough to feel his heat through the cold iron. "Don't," Raiden said, his voice rough. But he didn't back away. If anything, he leaned closer. "Don't what?" "Get this close. Look at me like that. Like—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "Like what?" Alicia whispered. Like any of this could be possible. Her hand moved before she could think, reaching through the bars. Her fingers stopped a hair's breadth from his. The air between them was charged, too heavy to breathe. Raiden looked at her hand, so close, almost touching, and something cracked in his expression. He lifted his own hand, his fingers finding hers. The door at the top of the stairs slammed open. Heavy footsteps thundered down with speed and fury, echoing off the stone walls like a storm. Raiden pulled back from the bars instantly, body snapping into a defensive stance on pure instinct. And then he appeared. The King of Fenrath was a force of nature even in human form. Tall, broad, with gray hair that had once been black and golden eyes, so like his son's, that burned with ancient fury. Scars mapped his exposed arms, proof of decades of war. And when he saw Alicia through the bars, when his gaze dropped to the crest still partly visible on the armor piled in the corner of the cell. His expression twisted into something terrible. "Ariston." The word came out as a snarl. "You brought Ariston blood into my castle, into my dungeons, and she's still breathing?" "Father." Raiden started. "Silence!" The king's voice boomed like thunder. "You dare interrupt me? Dare question me when an Ariston is living under my roof?" Guards filed in behind him, hands on sword hilts, eyes darting nervously between the raging king and the tense prince. The king turned to the guards. "Open the cell, now." "No." Raiden moved, blocking the path between his father and the bars. "You're not touching her. Move." "No." The king stepped toward his son, and there was something dangerous in the way he moved. "That woman carries the name of the man who broke into my home, who came into my chambers, who grabbed your mother by the hair and cut her throat while she begged for your life and mine." Each word hit like a blow. Alicia felt the world tilt, bile rising in her throat. "That wasn't war," the king went on, his voice turning harder. "It wasn't battle. It was murder. An execution. He came during a sacred celebration when we lowered our defenses. And he killed her. For land." "I know." Raiden tried. "You were 8. The king surged forward, stopping inches from his son's face. "You saw her blood on the marble floor. You heard the screams. And you swear on her grave, that you would destroy everything that carried the name Ariston." Alicia gripped the bars to keep from falling, tears burning in her eyes. "I didn't know," she said, voice breaking, desperate. "I didn't know any of that." The king turned on her, and the hatred in his eyes was so visceral that Alicia recoiled without meaning to. "You think I care what you knew?" He strode to the bars. Raiden moved to intercept, but the king shoved him aside with brutal force. "You carry his blood, his name, and that is enough. Father, stop." "King Ariston has learned his daughter is here," the king said, his eyes still locked on Alicia. "We intercepted messengers this morning. He's marching, with the full army, claiming we kidnapped his princess, using you as his excuse to attack." Alicia's heart stopped. "No, he wouldn't. He doesn't care about you," the king cut in, voice flat. "He wants a pretext, and you handed it to him for free." He turned back to Raiden. "So I'll say this once, my son. Open this cell and end her. Quick. Merciful if you want. But now. Before Ariston's army reaches our gates demanding their princess back." "No." Raiden's answer was steady. "That is an order." "I can't!" Raiden's voice exploded, ricocheting off the walls. A deadly silence fell. Then, lower, wrecked. "She's my mate." The world stopped. The king went utterly still, eyes wide with shock. Then horror. Then fury so intense the air itself seemed to vibrate. "No," he whispered. "Tell me it isn't true." "It's true." Raiden held his father's gaze. "I felt it when I touched her on the battlefield. The bond sealed. She's my mate. And I physically can't kill her, even if I wanted to." "They cursed me!" the king roared, fist slamming into the stone wall hard enough to crack it. "They bound my son to the daughter of my wife's murderer?" He turned to Alicia, and something in his eyes looked broken now, something like old pain rising to the surface. "Your mother," he said, his voice trembling, "begged for you, Raiden. For me. And Ariston laughed as he bled her out. And now you, his daughter, are bound to my son." Tears were running freely down Alicia's face now. "I didn't choose this. I didn't choose my father. I didn't choose the bond. But you have it." The king lunged back to the bars. "And every second you breathe under this roof is a betrayal of her memory, a betrayal of his oath." He turned on Raiden. "You swore. on your mother's grave, that you would destroy everything with Ariston blood. I know what I swore. Then do it! The order came like thunder, because sparing her is betraying your mother, spitting on her memory, saying her blood mattered less than this. This. She's my mate, Raiden shouted back. And you know what that means. You know I can't. That the wolf won't allow it. So you choose? The king took a dangerous step toward his son. You choose the murderer's daughter over your own mother's memory? It isn't a choice, Raiden's voice cracked. Not when the bond exists. Not when trying to kill her would be like tearing out my own heart. The king stood silent for a long moment, breathing hard, eyes burning with fury and grief braided together. Then, King Ariston arrives in 3 days, with an army, demanding his daughter back. His voice was controlled now, cold. And when he arrives, I will hand her over, at the castle gates, publicly, so everyone sees we do not negotiate with murderers. You can't. And you, the king continued, ignoring the interruption, will stay away from this dungeon, away from her, or I will remove you from the line of succession. The silence that followed was absolute. You wouldn't, Raiden said, but uncertainty threaded his voice. Try me. The king turned to the guards. No one enters or leaves this cell without my direct permission. And if the prince tries to come down here again, he looked at his son. Chain him up too. He started up the stairs, then paused, glancing back at Alicia one last time. 3 days, Ariston girl. Enjoy the fact I won't kill you. Because when your father arrives, I will return you myself. With that, he vanished up the stairs, guards following, leaving 2 new guards stationed at the entrance to the cell. Raiden stood frozen, staring at the place his father had disappeared, fists clenched so tight his knuckles went bone white. Raiden, Alicia began. No. He turned to her, and there was torment in his golden eyes. Don't speak. Don't make this harder. He'll force me to marry, she whispered. My father. When he finds out what I did, I know. Raiden stepped to the bars one last time, reaching through the iron to touch her face. The touch was brief, desperate. And I don't know how to stop it. Not without starting a war, not without betraying my own kingdom. He let her go, stepping back. And then he was gone. Heavy footsteps climbing the stairs, leaving Alicia alone in the dark. Time in the dungeon didn't move the same way. Alicia lost count of how many times the silence grew so heavy she had to force herself to breathe just to remember she was still alive. There were no windows, no way to tell whether it was morning or night, except for the torches that burned in steady intervals, throwing shadows that danced across the stone walls like restless ghosts. He killed her. The king's words echoed without end, a cruel litany that allowed no rest. And the worst part was that Alicia could no longer deny it, could no longer hide behind the comfortable ignorance she had lived in for 19 years. Her father was a monster, and she was his daughter. Does that make me a monster too? The question hung in the cold air, unanswered. Footsteps. Alicia snapped her head up, heart already racing before she even recognized the pattern. Raiden. He stepped out of the shadows, and they looked at each other in silence. It wasn't the awkward silence of strangers. It was the devastating silence of 2 people who knew exactly what the other was thinking, and had no words that could fix it. You came back, Alicia said at last. Yes, even though I shouldn't have. Raiden moved closer to the bars, and Alicia saw it then. The exhaustion in his eyes, the dark shadows beneath them, the tension in his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights. How much time is left? She asked. Less than 2 days. 2 days. Alicia stood, stepping toward the bars until she was inches from him. And then? Her voice came out lower, almost a whisper. When I'm gone, what will it be like for you? Raiden closed his eyes. as if the question were physical pain. I don't know. Raiden, I don't know how I'm supposed to wake up knowing you won't be here anymore. He cut in, voice rough. I don't know how I'm supposed to breathe when the bond starts screaming that you're too far away, that you're suffering, and I can't do a damn thing. He opened his eyes, and there was torment there. They say losing a mate is dying slowly, that every day without her is agony, and I'll have to live like that, knowing you're alive somewhere, but I'll never touch you again. See you. Have you close. Alicia felt tears burn. And I'll feel you too, even far away. Even when my father locks me up, marries me to another man, breaks me in every way, I'll feel you here. She pressed a hand to her chest. Like a part of me is always missing. Alicia. Raiden reached through the bars, his fingers finding hers. The contact was electric, devastating. How do we do this? How do we let go when everything in us is screaming to hold on? I don't know. She laced her fingers with his, holding on as if it were the only real thing left. But I can't see any other option. You have a kingdom, a people, a duty you can't abandon for me. And if I wanted to? The question came out cracked. What if I wanted to say the kingdom can burn, that I don't care about anything except... You do care. Elysia squeezed his hand. And that's why this hurts so much. Because you're exactly who you're supposed to be. Good. Honorable. And I can't ask you to change that. Silence fell again, too heavy to break easily. Raiden pulled her hand closer, pressing it to his chest, over the heart beating unevenly. I'm going to miss you. Even without ever really having had you. I'm going to miss you, like I've lost something essential. Me too. The tears finally fell. I'll think of you every night. Wonder if you're okay, if you manage to move on. I won't have peace without you, Raiden said, his voice firm despite the pain. But I'll survive. Because I have to. Elysia forced a smile through her tears. Promise me one thing. Anything. Don't hate me. After I'm gone, after time passes and all of this turns into memory, don't hate me for the name I carry. Raiden let go of her hand, took out the keys, and unlocked the cell with movements that looked automatic. The door creaked as it opened, and he stepped inside, closing the distance until there was no space left. I could never hate you, he whispered, his hand rising to cup her face with devastating gentleness. Even if I tried. Even when it would be easier. I can't. Elysia covered his hand with hers, turning her face to press her lips to his palm. Then give me something to remember. In the 2 days we have left, give me a memory that isn't only pain. It wasn't clear who moved first, and suddenly his mouth was on hers, and the world disappeared. It wasn't a kiss of reckless passion. It was a goodbye kiss, two people holding on to each other knowing it was the only time, that after this, there would be nothing but absence and longing, and the echo of what could have been. Raiden's hand slid up to hold her face with a gentleness that clashed with the desperation in the kiss. And Elysia clung to him, fingers fisting in his clothes, pulling him closer, trying to carve every detail into memory. His warmth, his scent, the way he breathed against her. It lasted seconds. Maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning. And then reality returned like ice water. Raiden pulled back first, retreating as slowly as he had come in. Eyes closed, breathing uneven, as if opening his eyes would make it all too real. This never should have happened, he said, voice rough. But it did, Elysia whispered, touching her own lips with trembling fingers. And I don't regret it, even knowing it makes everything harder. Raiden opened his eyes, and there was so much in them. Pain, desire, resignation. Neither do I. Elysia felt fresh tears spill. "Ryden, I have to go." But he didn't move. He stayed there, looking at her like he was memorizing every detail. "Before I can't. Then go." Alicia forced the words past her tight throat. He touched her face one last time, just a brush of fingers against her tear-wet cheek. Then he stepped out of the cell, locking the door again with hands that visibly shook. "I'm going to miss you," he said, his voice breaking. "Every day, every night, forever." "I know." Alicia gripped the bars, watching him back away. "Because I'm going to miss you too." And then he vanished up the stairs, leaving Alicia alone with the ghost of the kiss still burning on her lips and the devastating understanding that love, in this case, was just another form of torture. Because now she knew exactly what she was losing. And that made everything infinitely worse. The visit came the next night. Alicia was lying on the cot, staring at the stone ceiling when she heard the footsteps. Heavy, slow, different from Ryden's. She sat up, heart accelerating, and watched him step out of the shadows. The King of Fenrath, alone again. But there was something different this time. The fury was gone completely, replaced by something far worse. Weariness, emptiness. As if he had carried a weight for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to set it down. He stopped before the bars and simply looked at her in silence. Alicia rose, moving closer slowly. "Your Majesty, do you know what it is to lose a mate?" The question came without preface, without context, just thrown into the air like a stone into still water. Alicia shook her head. "It's waking up every morning and for 1 second, just 1 second, forgetting she's gone, and then remembering and having to die all over again." The king didn't look away. "It's seeing her place empty at the table, her chair at the council, the half of the bed that will never be warm again." He stepped closer. "It's hearing laughter in the castle and remembering the sound of hers. It's watching other mates walk together and feeling something inside you crack every time. It's spending decades existing, but never truly living." Alicia felt tears sting her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because my son looks at you the way I looked at her." The king's voice was controlled, but there was pain underneath it. "And I don't know if I want to save him from that, or if I want him to feel what I felt, to suffer the way I suffered. I don't understand." "You think I haven't seen?" the king cut in. "You think I don't know he comes down here when I forbade it? That he touches you like you're precious when he should hate you?" Silence. "He loves you. He has no choice but to love you. That's what happens with mates," the king said, and the words fell like a death sentence. "Maybe he doesn't know it yet. Maybe he's fighting it. But I recognize that look because I've worn that look, and it will destroy him." "Not if I'm gone," Alicia said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Not if you hand me to my father and we never see each other again." "You think distance matters?" The king gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "The bond doesn't care about distance. He'll feel it when your father hurts you. He'll feel every pain, every humiliation, every night you suffer. And he'll die slowly knowing he can't do anything." He stepped closer still, until only the bars separated them. "Just like I died. When she died. My body was still here, but the part that mattered, the part that knew how to live, died with her." "Then help me," Alicia begged. "Help me escape. Run from both kingdoms. Disappear so Ryden doesn't have to choose. And where would you go?" The question came sharp. "There is nowhere in this world the bond won't find you. Nowhere your father won't search. Nowhere my son won't feel your pain." The king stepped back, looking at her with something that almost resembled pity. "Tomorrow at dusk, your father arrives, with soldiers, demanding you back." He paused. "And I will hand you over, publicly, so everyone sees." "And Ryden?" He'll watch. Because he needs to understand some choices aren't ours to make. The king turned to leave. And maybe, if he sees you go, if he sees you return to your father, maybe he'll manage to survive what comes after. You don't believe that, Alicia said. The king stopped, not turning around. No, he admitted, voice low. But it's the only hope I have. Because the alternative is watching my son die the same way I died. And I don't know if I can survive that again. And then he disappeared, leaving Alicia alone with the understanding that this man, this fierce, broken king, wasn't fighting against her. He was fighting to save his son from the same sentence he carried. And he didn't know how. The alarm came at dawn. Alicia was lying on the cot, staring at the ceiling, when the bell above her burst to life. Loud, urgent, echoing through the entire castle like a battle cry. Then came the voices. Army sighted. Positions on the walls. Soldiers to the north. Ready the defenses. Footsteps ran in every direction, metal clanging, orders shouted, the whole castle tipping into controlled chaos. Alicia stood, walking to the bars, trying to hear more. And then she felt it, through stone, through distance, the steady, rhythmic pounding of war drums, heavy, relentless, each beat like a countdown to the end. King Ariston had arrived. A guard came running down, stopping in front of the cell with uneven breath. Message from the king. You will be handed over at dusk, at the main gates, publicly. Alicia nodded slowly. The day arrived with the sound of drums. Alicia had spent the night awake, listening to the steady pounding that never stopped. Her father's army was out there, so close she could feel the vibration through the stone walls, as if the entire castle were trembling in anticipation. Above, in the castle, footsteps never stopped running. Voices shouted orders. Metal rang against metal, preparations for war that never let up. And then the steps descended to her. Many footsteps, the official escort. The door at the top of the stairs opened, and 4 guards came down in formation. Behind them, dressed in formal black armor that caught the torchlight, came Ryden. Their eyes met through the bars. Neither of them spoke. There were no words for this moment. Only the crushing weight of everything that was about to happen. One of the guards unlocked the cell, the door groaning as it swung open. Princess Ariston, he said, voice formal and controlled. It's time. She walked out of the cell with her head high, refusing to show fear. The guards positioned themselves around her, not aggressively, but clearly ready to stop any attempt at escape, as if she had anywhere to run. Ryden didn't come closer. He kept his distance, but his eyes never left her. There was so much in them, torment, desperation, and something that felt like a silent apology for being unable to change what was about to happen. Alicia forced a small smile. It wasn't happy. It was sad, resigned, but it was real. It's okay, she tried to say with her eyes. You're doing what you have to do. But from the look in his eyes, he didn't accept that forgiveness. The procession began to climb, through stone corridors, up spiraling stairs. And then they reached the great hall. And Alicia understood it would not be private. The hall was packed, nobles, advisors, soldiers, servants, all pressed against the walls, forming a narrow corridor down the center. Hundreds of people, and all of them staring at her with eyes burning with emotion she couldn't fully name. The silence when they saw her was deafening. Then someone spat. Murderer. The word came from somewhere in the crowd. A man's voice, rough with hate. And it was like a dam breaking. Ariston blood. Monster's daughter. She should be dead. Burn her with her father. The voices erupted from every side, swelling in volume and fury. People surged closer, guards forced to use spear shafts to keep them back. Faces twisted with hate, screamed things that made Elysia tremble. She killed our queen. Cursed blood. Traitor. Elysia forced herself to keep walking, each step costing more than the last. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to look at the furious faces, but the words still struck like physical blows. They hate me. Of course they did. She carried the name of the man who had ruined their lives. It didn't matter that she hadn't known. It didn't matter that she had run from him. To them, she was simply another Ariston, another enemy. Someone threw something. Elysia didn't see what it was, only felt it splatter against her shoulder. Wet, rotten, maybe spoiled fruit. Get out of here! Go back to your monster of a father! Send her back in pieces! One of the guards struck his spear against his shield, the sound ringing out. Silence! By order of the king. But it barely mattered. The hatred was palpable, a living thing that filled the hall and threatened to choke her. Elysia felt tears burning, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. Raiden moved then, subtle but deliberate. He positioned himself closer, a human shield between Elysia and the most violent part of the crowd. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. But the message was clear. Touch her, and you answer to me. Some in the crowd noticed. Confused murmurs began to mingle with the hateful shouts. Why is he protecting her? She's a prisoner, not a guest. Has the prince lost his mind? At last they reached the end of the hall, where the king of Fenrath waited. He was dressed in full armor, not ceremonial, decorative armor, but real battle armor, tested, marked, ready for war. He glanced at her briefly as she passed, and something flickered across his face. Then he turned to the crowd, his voice booming through the hall. Silence! The command was absolute. The crowd fell quiet instantly, though the hatred still thrummed in the air. This woman, the king said, gesturing toward Elysia, carries a name we all have reason to hate. But she is in Fenrath's custody, and anyone who lays a hand on her without permission will be treated as a traitor. Understood? Reluctant murmurs of agreement. Good. The king turned. Now let's finish this. The procession continued, through side corridors, away from the raging crowd, toward the main doors. But Elysia could still hear the shouting echoing behind them, each word a scar that would never fully heal. When they finally reached the massive doors leading outside, the king stopped. He gestured, and the guards began to open the doors. So many soldiers. Perfect formation. Armor gleaming under the sun beginning to set. Banners bearing the Ariston crest snapping in the wind. And at the head of it all, mounted on a black horse that looked as cruel as its rider, there he was. King Ariston. Elysia hadn't seen him in days, but it felt like a lifetime. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, broad, dark hair beginning to gray at the temples. A face carved into hard lines that had never known gentleness, and those eyes, storm gray, ice cold, fixed on her with an intensity that turned her stomach. There was no love there, no paternal concern, only cold, calculated rage. But there was something else, too. Something in his eyes when he saw how she was positioned, between guards, a prisoner, but also protected. Surprise, and then even greater fury. The king of Fenrath walked to the edge of the staircase leading to the doors, Elysia and Raiden behind him. The two armies were separated by perhaps 50 meters of open ground. Neutral territory, but the tension was so thick it felt solid. King Ariston, the king of Fenrath called, his voice carrying through the silence. You've come to retrieve your property. The insult was deliberate. Elysia felt, more than saw, Raiden tense behind her. King Ariston dismounted with fluid movements that belied his age. He walked a few steps forward, stopping at the edge of his own army. I came to retrieve my daughter, he corrected, voice deep and controlled. Who was kidnapped while traveling? An act of war. Kidnapped? The King of Fenrath let out a humorless laugh. Interesting story. Tell me, Ariston, did your daughter look like she was resisting when she was found on the battlefield dressed as a soldier? Murmurs rippled through both armies. Ariston didn't blink. Clearly manipulated, deceived. My daughter would not have choices of her own, so inappropriate. Your daughter, the King of Fenrath said, his voice hardening, seems to have made quite a few choices, including running from you. Lies. The word snapped. Fenrath has always lied. Always twisted truth to paint itself as the victim. When everyone knows that, everyone knows what? The king took a step forward. That you invaded my palace during a sacred celebration? That you murdered my unarmed mate? That you tried to kill my 8-year-old son? The silence that fell was absolute. Soldiers on both sides exchanged looks. This was more than diplomacy. This was a reckoning decades in the making. King Ariston smiled. It was a terrible expression. No warmth, no humor, only the sharp edge of a blade. Your mate died in war. Tragic, certainly, but war has consequences. He looked directly at Elysia then. Now, my daughter, immediately. Or there are reasons here to take what is mine by force. No. The word left Elysia before she could stop it, before she could think, before she could weigh consequences. Every eye turned to her. Elysia stepped forward, out from behind the King of Fenrath, placing herself where everyone could see her clearly. No, she repeated, her voice steadier now. I'm not going back with you. King Ariston narrowed his eyes. Elysia, return to your place. You are clearly confused. I'm not confused. Elysia descended another step. For the first time in my life, I'm seeing clearly. Silence. The order cracked like a whip. You do not speak without permission. You silenced me for 19 years. Her voice rose, echoing. You fed me lies. You told me Fenrath were the monsters, that the war started because they struck first, that their queen died in fair battle. She could feel Raiden tense behind her, could feel the King of Fenrath watching with razor focus. But it was a lie, Elysia went on. All of it was a lie. You invaded during a sacred celebration. You murdered an unarmed woman. You left an 8-year-old child watching his mother die on the floor. Murmurs burst among Ariston's soldiers. Some looked shocked, others confused, but all of them were listening. King Ariston took a threatening step forward. I dare tell the truth, Elysia shouted back. Because I'm your daughter, but I'm not you. And I won't spend one more day living inside your lies, being sold to seal your alliances, pretending you're anything other than the monster you've always been. The silence that followed was so complete, Elysia could hear her own heartbeat. King Ariston went perfectly still, his face carved from stone. But something in his eyes now, fury so intense the air around him seemed to vibrate. You, he said low and dangerous, have just committed treason. Against your family, against your kingdom, against me. Then I'm a traitor, Elysia answered, keeping her voice steady even as fear snarled beneath her ribs. I'd rather be that than be complicit. King Ariston turned to his soldiers. Take her. Now. 10 soldiers moved at once, starting across the neutral ground toward the stairs. And Raiden moved. He appeared at Elysia's side so fast she barely saw him, sword drawn, placing himself between her and the approaching soldiers. One more step, Raiden said, his voice sharp as steel, and that's a declaration of war. The soldiers stopped, looking to King Ariston for instruction. Move aside, boy, Ariston said. She is my daughter, my property. You have no right. She is under Fenrath's protection, Raiden cut in, and anyone who touches her answers to me. Raiden, the King of Fenrath said behind them, his voice weighted with warning. Think about what you're doing. I am thinking, Raiden replied without turning. and I choose to protect her." The king was silent for a long moment. Then he exhaled, heavy, resigned, and stepped down to stand beside his son. "Then Fenrath chooses to protect her," the king declared, his voice carrying. "Elysia Ariston is in our custody. Any attempt to take her by force will be considered an act of war." King Ariston looked between father and son, something dangerous glinting in his eyes. "Do you understand what you're doing? You're starting a war over a girl who isn't even yours?" "She is my mate," Raiden said. The world stopped. Elysia felt the air leave her lungs. He had said it, publicly, in front of both armies, in front of her father. There was no going back now. Murmurs erupted, soldiers on both sides shocked, confused, horrified. The mate bond was sacred, unbreakable, and Raiden had just declared he was bound to the daughter of the kingdom's greatest enemy. King Ariston went utterly still for 3 seconds. Then he began to laugh. It was a terrible sound. No humor, no joy, only distilled cruelty. "Your mate," he repeated, still laughing. "Perfect, absolutely perfect. They bound the Prince of Fenrath to the daughter of the man who killed his mother." He stopped laughing abruptly, his face snapping back into that cold mask. "It doesn't matter. Bond or not, she's mine. And I will take her back, even if I have to burn this castle down to the foundations." "Try," Raiden said, low and dangerous, "and find out what happens when you touch what's mine." King Ariston looked at his daughter one last time. "You chose your side, Elysia. Remember that when everything collapses. When this kingdom you're protecting bleeds because of you. When people die because you couldn't obey." He turned to his soldiers. "Prepare for siege. No one enters or leaves this castle. And when the walls fall, because they will fall, I will reclaim what is mine." "That is a declaration of war," the King of Fenrath said. "Yes," King Ariston confirmed. "It is exactly that." He swung back onto his horse with fluid movement, glancing at the castle one last time. 3 days, he said. 3 days to hand my daughter over and avoid bloodshed. After that, we begin." With that, he turned his horse and rode back toward his army. The soldiers followed in formation, beginning to spread out, forming siege lines around the castle. The King of Fenrath turned to Raiden, and there was something shattered in his eyes. "Do you know what you've just done?" "Yes," Raiden answered, still staring after King Ariston. "I started a war." The king looked at Elysia, then at his son. "I hope she's worth it, because it will cost everything." He started up the steps back into the castle, shouting orders. "Close the gates. Prepare defenses. I want archers in the towers and supplies rationed starting now." Soldiers ran in every direction, the castle transforming into a besieged fortress in a matter of minutes. Elysia stood still, watching her father's army spread around them like a net tightening. Then she felt Raiden's hand brush hers, just a graze of fingers, but enough to make her look at him. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "You didn't have to choose." "Yes, I did." Raiden laced his fingers with hers, holding tight. "Because losing you would be worse than losing any war. Even knowing what it will cost? Especially knowing." He pulled her closer, his free hand rising to touch her face. "And we're not going to lose." All around them, the chaos continued. Soldiers running, orders shouted, doors being reinforced. But in that moment, there was only the two of them, and the war that was about to begin because of a love that never should have existed. The castle bell began to ring, not the invasion alarm, but the war bell. Loud, heavy, inevitable. And outside, in Ariston's camps, drums began to answer. War didn't begin with an explosion. It began with silence. In the 3 days that followed the siege, Fenrath's castle became something else. It was no longer a home. It was a besieged fortress, where every breath carried the weight of waiting, where every sound could be the prelude to the final attack. Alicia did not return to the dungeons. The king ordered her placed in rooms, not the royal chambers, but decent quarters in a side tower. There were guards at the door, not to keep her imprisoned, the king made it clear, but to protect her from the fury of Fenrath's own people. Because even inside the castle, even under official protection, she was still an Ariston. And hatred didn't vanish because of decrees. Alicia spent the first hours simply staring out the narrow window, watching her father's army settle in. Tents going up. Fires being lit. Weapons being sharpened. The door opened without warning. Alicia turned, expecting a guard or a servant. But it was Raiden. He looked different, still in armor, but there was something in the way he moved now. Heavier, as if the weight of what he had done was finally sinking in. "You should be with your father," Alicia said softly. "Planning defenses, preparing the soldiers." "I was." Raiden shut the door behind him, leaning back against it as if he needed the support. "For the past 10 hours. But I needed to see you. I needed to know you're okay. I'm alive." Alicia tried to smile, but couldn't quite manage it. "Does that count as okay?" Raiden crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into him before she could think. His arms closed around her with a force that should have been too much, but felt like exactly what she needed. Alicia clung to him, face sinking into his chest, breathing in the scent of metal and leather and something that was fundamentally him. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his armor. "For all of this. For making you choose. For starting a war. Stop." His voice was firm but gentle. "You didn't start anything. This war began decades ago. You only forced us to finally face it." He drew back slightly, hands framing her face so he could look into her eyes. "And I don't regret the choice. Even knowing what it will cost. There are still 2 days, Alicia said, her voice breaking. "Your father could hand me over, avoid all of this, save lives. It won't happen." The interruption was soft but final. "He's already decided. Fenrath will fight." Alicia closed her eyes, silent tears falling. They stayed that way for long minutes, simply holding each other in the quiet of the room, while outside the world prepared to bleed. The second day brought the moment Alicia both feared and needed. The king of Fenrath called an assembly in the main courtyard. Not just soldiers, everyone. Nobles, advisors, servants, citizens who lived within the walls. Everyone who had shouted "murderer" when she passed. Alicia went down escorted by guards, Raiden at her side. She could feel the stares, some still full of hatred, others curious, some uncertain. The king stood on a raised platform, armor gleaming under the sun. When Alicia arrived, he motioned for her to come up. She hesitated, but Raiden touched her back gently, urging her on. She climbed, and stood beside the king, facing hundreds of eyes fixed on her. The silence was absolute. "You saw this woman," the king began, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "And you shouted, 'Murderer! Traitor!'" Uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the crowd. "And you had reason to hate the name she carries," the king continued. "King Ariston took something precious from us. He killed our queen. He stained our kingdom with innocent blood. And this woman is his daughter." Alicia forced herself to keep her head high, even as she felt the weight of every gaze. "But you also saw," the king said, his voice growing stronger. "When she stood before her own father and defied him. When she exposed his lies in public. When she chose to stay here, knowing she could die, rather than return to the monster who raised her." He turned to look directly at Alicia. "This woman is not responsible for her father's crimes. She proved that when she had courage few would have, enough to look her own blood in the face and say no, to choose truth over family loyalty, to choose honor over survival. The king turned back to the crowd. My son has chosen her as his mate, and I accept that choice. Alicia Ariston is no longer only the enemy's daughter. She is the mate of my heir. And when the war to come is over, she will be part of this family. The silence that fell was heavy. Then, from the back of the crowd, someone began to clap. Slowly, hesitantly. Another joined, then another. It wasn't an outburst of approval, but it was acceptance, a recognition that perhaps blood didn't define everything. Night came. At dawn tomorrow, the battle would begin. Alicia was in her quarters when Ryden entered. No armor this time, just simple clothes, hair loose. And in his eyes there was something that made her heart tighten. Fear, not of battle, but of loss. Tomorrow, he said, voice rough. Everything changes. I know. Alicia crossed the room to him. And I need to tell you something before it's too late. What? I'm going to fight. The words came out steady, without hesitation. Tomorrow, at your side, on the front line. No. The answer was immediate. Absolutely not. It's suicide. And staying here waiting to see if you survive is worse, Alicia cut in. You think I can stay hidden while you bleed? While people die protecting me? Alicia, you don't have enough training. I have more than you think, and I have something more important. She held his face in both hands. I have a reason to fight. I have you to protect. And no one is going to tell me I can't stand beside my mate when he needs me most. Ryden closed his eyes, conflict etched into every line of his face. If anything happens to you, then it happens. But it happens fighting, not hidden like a coward. Alicia pulled him closer. Don't ask me to be anything other than what I am. Not now. Not when this could be our last night. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Ryden opened his eyes, and there was so much there. Love, fear, desire, desperation. Our last night, he repeated softly. Maybe, Alicia whispered. So don't waste it trying to convince me to stay safe. Something broke in him then. The last resistance, the last trace of control. He pulled her into him, his mouth finding hers with an urgency that stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't hesitant. It was pure need, connection, confirmation. The desperate urge to carve every touch into memory in case it was the last. Alicia answered with the same desperation, fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, closer, as if she could fuse herself to him and never be separated again. Ryden lifted her without effort, carrying her to the bed. He laid her down gently on the sheets, his body covering hers. But he paused, staring at her as if he were memorizing every detail. I love you, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. I love you too, Alicia whispered, touching his face with trembling fingers. He kissed her again. Slower this time, savoring it. Hands sliding through her hair, over her face, down her neck, as if every touch were precious. And Alicia lost herself in him, in the hands that explored her with reverence, in the lips that traced paths of fire across her skin, in the way he whispered her name like a prayer. Clothes disappeared, slowly, carefully, each layer removed, revealing more skin that had never been touched like this, exposing vulnerabilities that went far beyond the physical. When at last there were no more barriers between them, when they were completely bare to each other, Ryden stopped again. Are you sure? He asked, even with desire plain in his eyes. Because after this, there's no going back. You'll be mine in every way. I'm already yours, Alicia replied. Ryden touched her as if she were sacred, hands mapping every curve with a care that contrasted with the obvious need. Lips tracing lines of heat that made her arch into him, asking for more without a word. At last they came together completely, no space left between them. He moved with her, finding a rhythm that carried them beyond thought, beyond fear, into a place where only sensation and connection existed, and a love so intense it hurt. Alicia was lost in the way he filled her entirely, in the way each movement sent waves of pleasure through her, in the way he whispered words of love and impossible promises against her skin. When the tension finally broke, when they reached the peak together with each other's names on their lips, Alicia felt something inside her click into place, as if a piece that had always been missing had finally fit. The mate bond sang, louder, stronger than ever, sealing them in a way that went beyond the physical. Souls threading together so completely it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Afterward, tangled in rumpled sheets, hearts still racing, sweat cooling on their skin, they simply held each other. Neither of them wanted to break the silence, because speaking meant acknowledging the night was ending. That morning would come, and everything would change. Dawn arrived cold and gray. Alicia woke still in Ryden's arms, sensing the shift in the air before she even opened her eyes. Today was the day. Ryden was already awake, watching her with an expression that blended love and torment. "You still want to do this?" he asked softly. "Fight at my side?" "Yes," Alicia answered without hesitation. He nodded, resigned. "Then we'll get you ready." The next hour was a blur. Armor being adjusted, not the ill-fitting armor she'd stolen before, but pieces made specifically for her. Light, but protective. Flexible, but strong. A sword being chosen. Not too heavy. Balanced for her height and strength. And then, dressed for war, Alicia looked into the mirror and saw not the princess she used to be. She saw a warrior. "Ready?" Ryden asked behind her, already fully armed. "No," Alicia admitted. "But I'm going anyway." They went down together, through corridors already crowded with soldiers preparing, through the courtyard where the king organized formations, to the main gates. When the king saw Alicia armed and ready, he stopped. "She insists," Ryden said before his father could protest. "And I'm not going to fight her on it. Not today." The king studied Alicia for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "Stay close to Ryden. Don't stray. Understood?" "Understood," Alicia confirmed. The king turned to the gathered soldiers. "Formation. Time to show Ariston that Fenrath doesn't fall easily." The war cry that answered shook the walls, and the gates opened. On the other side, Ariston's army waited. King Ariston stood at the front, mounted on the black horse, staring at the castle with an expression that promised destruction. Then his eyes found Alicia, and something shifted in his face. Surprise, followed by absolute fury. "You traitor!" he roared, his voice carrying. "You dare fight your own blood?" "I share no blood with monsters," Alicia shouted back, feeling a courage she hadn't known she possessed. "And today, you pay for every life you've taken." King Ariston dismounted, shifting even before his feet hit the ground. The massive dark-furred wolf roared, a sound that made the earth tremble. And then it charged. His army followed. And Fenrath met them in the middle. The impact was brutal. Metal against metal, fangs against fangs, screams tearing through the air. Alicia fought beside Ryden. She killed. More than once. Felt her blade bite into flesh, saw blood spray, heard final screams. And each time, something inside her died a little. But she kept going. Because stopping meant dying. The battle raged for hours. Bodies fell on both sides. The ground grew slick with blood. And then Alicia saw it. Her father, the massive wolf, breaking through Fenrath's lines, heading straight for the king. Ryden saw it too, shifting instantly. His wolf launched, intercepting Ariston before he could reach the king. the two wolves collided with a force that cracked stone, rolling in a mass of fangs and claws. When they separated, both bleeding, Alicia saw the plan forming. The king of Fenrath shifted, and 3 of his best warriors did the same. 5 wolves now surrounded Ariston, not to kill him, but to capture him. Ariston fought with desperate ferocity, but even a powerful alpha couldn't defeat 5 coordinated opponents. They forced him down, fangs locking onto legs, throat, pinning him without killing. "Stop!" The shout came from one of Ariston's commanders. "Lower your weapons! The Alpha has fallen!" Confusion rippled through Ariston's army. But slowly, following ancient protocol, weapons began to drop. Because without a leader, without an Alpha, there was no battle. Only surrender. Raiden shifted back to human, breathing hard, covered in blood but alive. The others did the same, keeping Ariston, still in wolf form, pinned to the ground. "Shift," the king of Fenrath ordered, voice hard. "Face your judgment as a man, not a beast." For a moment it looked like Ariston would refuse. Then slowly he shifted back. Naked, bleeding, but still with that arrogance in his eyes. Someone threw a cloak over him. Fenrath's soldiers hauled him up, wrenching his arms behind his back. The king walked until he stood before him, eyes burning with hatred and old memories. "King Ariston," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent battlefield. "You invaded my kingdom, murdered my mate, brought war to our doors, and now you are captured." He paused, letting the words settle. "By the law of our people, you have 3 choices: death, exile, or full transfer of power to the direct heir." Ariston looked around, at his defeated army, at the bodies scattered across the field, at the daughter standing beside the enemy. "If you choose death," the king continued, "you will be executed at sunset. If you choose exile, you will be banished from both kingdoms, condemned to wander as a nameless drifter with no home. If you choose to transfer power, your daughter takes the throne as Queen of Ariston, all territories, all authority, and you lose everything." Absolute silence fell. Ariston finally looked at Alicia. Really looked, perhaps for the first time seeing beyond property, beyond a political tool, seeing the woman she had become in spite of him. "Alicia," he said, voice rough. "Come closer." Alicia hesitated, but Raiden touched her back gently. She walked to stand before her father, keeping a safe distance. "You defied me," Ariston said, not as an accusation but as fact. "Publicly, exposed me as a liar and a murderer before both kingdoms." "Because it was the truth," Alicia replied steady. "Yes, it was." He studied her for a long moment. "And in doing it, you proved yourself stronger than I ever was. Strong enough to choose honor over blind loyalty. Strong enough to admit when you were wrong." He took a deep breath. "I spent decades building an empire of lies, creating war where there could have been peace. And I raised you inside all those lies, believing it would make you the perfect tool." "And you did," Alicia said softly. "Until I broke." "Yes." Something that almost looked like pride flickered in his eyes. "And in breaking, you became exactly what this kingdom needs. What both kingdoms need." He turned to the king of Fenrath. "I choose transfer of power. All territories. All authority are hers." Murmurs exploded among soldiers on both sides. Ariston looked back at Alicia. "And I choose exile as well. I leave everything behind. Kingdom, name, power." "Father," Alicia began, but he shook his head. "Don't call me that. I didn't earn that title." His voice cracked for the first time. "You offered defiance, truth, courage, and all I ever gave you in return was lies and control." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Forgive me." The words came low, broken. "For every lie. For every time I made you feel less than you are. For trying to shape you into something you never should have been." Tears streamed down Alicia's face. I forgive you, but I don't forget. You shouldn't. Ariston opened his eyes. Carry what I did as a reminder of how not to lead, of how not to love, and be everything I failed to be. He turned to the guards. I'm ready. Take me to gather my things, and then to exile. The King of Fenrith nodded. So be it. King Ariston is banished from both kingdoms. Anyone who gives him shelter will be treated as a traitor. Guards began to lead Ariston away, but he stopped, looking at Alicia one last time. You chose right, he said softly. He'll love you better than I ever could, and he'll give you the future you deserve. And then he was gone, escorted by guards. Leaving Alicia there, holding the signet ring a guard had placed in her hand, the symbol of leadership over an entire kingdom. 3 months later, Fenrath's castle gleamed under the full moon. Decorated with flowers from both kingdoms, Fenrath's white, Ariston's red, braided together as a symbol of union, with torches casting golden light over everything, with smiling faces from two peoples who had learned, slowly, painfully, to coexist. Alicia stood before the mirror, staring at her reflection. The dress was beautiful, white as snow, embroidered with golden and red threads that represented both kingdoms. It wasn't the dress her father would have chosen. It was the dress she chose. For the day, she would marry Raiden. The door opened and the King of Fenrath entered. He stopped when he saw her, and something softened in his expression. You look beautiful, he said quietly. The way she would have. Alicia felt tears sting. Do you think she would approve? Your mate. If she were here. The king was quiet for a moment. I think she would have seen what I see now. A woman strong enough to break cycles. To choose love over hate. To guide 2 kingdoms toward something better. He stepped closer, offering his arm. And she would have been proud to call you her daughter. The tears fell then, not from sorrow but from relief, from acceptance finally earned. Ready? The king asked. Yes, Alicia replied, taking his arm. They walked together, through corridors draped in flowers from both kingdoms, down staircases where Ariston and Fenrath nobles spoke peacefully, into the great hall where hundreds waited. And there, at the improvised altar, Raiden stood waiting, dressed formally, hair partly tied back, eyes locked on her with a love so intense it stole the air from her lungs. The king led her to him, placing her hand in his. Take care of her, the king said softly. With my life, Raiden promised. The ceremony was beautiful. Ancient words about the binding of souls, about destined mates, about love that transcends everything, about peace that begins with a choice. And when, at last, the words were spoken, you may kiss your mate, Raiden pulled her into him, sealing his mouth to hers in a kiss that promised eternity. The crowd erupted in applause, people of Fenrath and Ariston together, celebrating more than a union. They were celebrating a future. When they parted, foreheads resting together, Alicia whispered, Was it worth it? Every second, Raiden answered. Every sacrifice, every tear, because it brought me you, and it brought peace. And in that moment, surrounded by 2 kingdoms that had bled together and survived together, Alicia finally understood. She was no longer only Ariston's daughter, no longer only the princess who ran. She was a leader, a mate, a bridge between 2 worlds, and she was exactly who she was meant to be. Somewhere, on distant roads, a man who once was king walked alone, without kingdom, without power, without a name. Only a wanderer seeking redemption he might never find. But here, in the castle where love had defeated hate, where peace had replaced war, a new era was beginning. The war was over, love had won, and the future, at last, was theirs to build.